All right. Well, thanks for being with us here today. If you weren't here a couple minutes ago, my name is Lou, one of the pastors here, and I'm really happy that you're spending some of your Easter with us today. So as a church, we're a young church, in case you don't know. It's our third Easter. And this year, I want to ask you one question, or at least focus on one question. Give you one thing to think about this year on Easter Sunday. But before I tell you what the question is, here's how we'll get there, all right? So if you've ever been in a classroom, right? Have you ever been in a class, maybe in high school, middle school, right? And it's one of those days when the teacher is just rolling, you know? There's like, the room is electric, there's energy, everyone's interested, people are paying attention. You're paying attention whether you were previously interested in it or not, right? And the subject on these special days, the subject is kind of irrelevant. You know, maybe they're talking about the periodic table or something in geometry or, you know, algebra. And normally you're not interested, but there's something about this day and there's like this energy in the room. Everyone's paying attention. You ever been there on one of those days? If you're a teacher, you know it's a special day, right? It's a good day. But then there's this student, you know, and sometimes it's the same one who will just kind of sneak their hand up, and the unsuspecting teacher will call on them, and the question they'll ask is, am I ever gonna use this in life? You know that kid? That was me. I was that kid. And so if you're a teacher, I don't know, maybe you're not so crazy about me right now. But really, I need to know. You know, I'm at the end of my ability to pay attention just to be nice. And now I need to know, is there gonna be a time in my life when I really care about the elements of the periodic table? Do I need to know this, you know, algebra equation? Do I need to know the iambic pentameter in English, or whatever the subject is? I need to know. The question really is, does this really matter? Does it really matter? Or we could say very practically, what I'm wondering really is like, the version of me that knows this stuff, is he really better off than the version of me that doesn't? You know? That's the question. Now, if you've been in that situation, you know it's all up to the teacher in that moment. And if the teacher says yes and can present a convincing case, then everybody leans in and the room is filled with educational curiosity, you know? Right? Like if you have a teacher, we're doing percentages and I drop the question and he or she jumps back and says, you know, one day you're gonna be on a date and you're gonna wanna be able to calculate the tip, and you don't wanna waste money, but you don't wanna look cheap, and there's a lot on the line in this situation, you better pay attention. I'm in that moment. Now they didn't know that we were gonna have the iPad that flips around that gives you the option to pay 18, 20, or 22%. But you get the idea, right? And then there are other teachers that would just say, well, it's gonna be on the test. And you could just feel the energy in the room go down. So that way of thinking for me has haunted me in certain situations, but it's also been helpful at times, especially when it comes to church and faith and God, right? Like it's Easter Sunday. And if you don't know the story, on Good Friday, Jesus, this guy who claimed to be God, he was killed brutally. And on the third day, he's back. And so as a kid, growing up, we'd go to church on Easter Sunday, and I knew it was like a positive day, you know, like high energy, we're celebrating, this is good news. Why? Jesus is alive, you know, and so it's up, and it's important. It's a big day. More people go to church than normal. But there's this annoying little kid inside of me that's sitting in the rows like, am I ever gonna use this in life? Like, really? Does this really matter? Whether or not I believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Or very practically, does the version of me that believes this, is he really better off than the version of me that doesn't? Is it gonna affect my life on, Tuesday and Wednesday? Is it gonna change the way I parent? Is it gonna change the way I see my relationships, my marriage, my dating relationships, my professional life, my role as a student, whatever? Does it actually make a difference? And here's what I'll tell you. The way that you answer that question, whether you are an every Sunday church person, a sometimes church person, or you don't want to be here right now and you can't wait till this is over, how you answer this question, does it matter? And if so, how? How you answer that question will determine whether or not you lean in, like wanting to know more, or if the joy and the motivation is completely zapped from your whole church experience. Or at the very best, you pretend to believe because you feel like it's supposed to do. That's what you're supposed to do. So, picture this, right? Imagine this. Imagine you're in a culture where some people believe in God and they read a sacred book and they try to do what it says and they have traditions and they're into it. Then there are other people that are like, no, we're not into it. Like God hasn't done anything in a long time. Maybe back then, doesn't seem to be doing anything now. And so we're like really not into it. And then maybe there's some people in between, right? Like, okay, we're not sure. Some days yes, some days no, depends, right? That was actually the kind of culture that Jesus grew up in. There were certain people that were totally into this. They were totally on board. They would, read their Bibles and teach them and study them, and they were totally convinced someone's coming back. These ancient Jewish people, like 2,000 years ago, they believed that someone was coming to help them. They were under the oppression of the Roman Empire, and they believed that there was someone that was coming to take care of this. Like, Moses came before Jesus, the guy with the 10 Commandments, which is gonna be on later on some channel with Charlton Heston. They believed there was another Moses coming, someone like Moses, and someone who would be like a king, like David. Another David from David and Goliath, the little boy that killed the giant and then became king. So they're waiting. They're like, yes, someone's gonna come. They called this person the Messiah. And then there were other people that were like, yeah, we don't think so. Well, one day, Jesus shows up from a no-name town, Nazareth. And he's really born to common people. He even has a common name. Like, you know him as Jesus, and you probably think of one Jesus, like Jesus Christ. But back then, in Hebrew, that name was just Joshua. And so there would have been a lot of other people in Jesus' class with his same name. So normal guy, normal name, Joshua, son of Joe. There's probably another Joe out there, right? And he shows up like a pretty normal guy, but he starts doing some pretty amazing things. And he invites people to follow him. And at first, these people who follow him, they're like, yeah, we're not totally sure. The responses are all across the board. Like one person like kind of gives him an okay, fine, and steps in this direction. Another person's name was Nathaniel. He's very open, and he basically is like, yeah, I'm really not expecting much out of this guy because of where he's from, but fine. And as they take these little steps in his direction, pretty quickly, their lives begin to change. Like they start seeing him do things other people can't do. You know, his first big thing was turning water into wine. There was a party, a wedding that was gonna end because they ran out of wine. And Jesus kept the party going. He brought out the wine. That was a pretty good way to start the whole operation. And then he starts doing some other things. He starts teaching people what God is like. Now, in that culture, at that time, they were obsessed with the rights and the wrongs, the do's and the don'ts. And so they see God as this judge who's ready to drop the hammer, and he explains God as a father who cares. Like cares, he says, even more than you care for your own kids. He knows the number of hairs on your head, however many there may be. He cares about your future. He's invested in you, like knows you by name. And he says, so don't worry. He presented to people a better way to live life, to be human. And you know what happened? People were drawn to him by the multitudes. It was hard for him even to get around because thousands of people wanted to hear what he had to say. People who were nothing like him wanted to be around him. The people in society everyone loved, the people everyone hated, they all wanted to hear what he had to say because his message was so magnetic. And then he started making some claims about himself. And this is where things got a little crazy. He talked about that deep-rooted yearning that everybody has for more. And we chase after it all different sorts of ways, right? Success, money, relationships. Like there's something in you that wants something. Maybe you can't put your finger on it. He calls it a hunger. And then he says, he doesn't say, I have. He says, I am the bread to that hunger, me. People aren't like totally sure what to do with that. And he talks to somebody else who has kind of been pushed out of her society. She'd been married 6, 7, 8 almost times. And he talks to her and he's like, you're looking for something. He says, I am what you're looking for. If you want to call that yearning, if you want to call it a thirst, I'm the water to that thirst. He says in all different ways, if internally there's something you don't exactly know how to explain, you want to call it darkness, I am the light to that darkness. If it's just a weariness within your soul, I am the rest to your soul. And people wanted to hear what he had to say. What he said for so many was almost too good to be true. That there really is someone up there that cares. And so thousands come out to see him. Well, at a certain point, things went from really good to confusing to really bad. Like Palm Sunday came along, all right? Now Palm Sunday, the whole city comes out. They're throwing a parade for Jesus. He's on the donkey, you know, they're throwing their jackets, their palms on the ground. And if you were one of those followers with Jesus, like the ones who was in it from the start, you were glad you got in early, right? It's like investing in Apple in the early 80s. Like, oh, I'm sure glad I'm on the inside at this point, you know, because he's king and he seems to be embracing it and it's going super well. But then they sit down one night for dinner and he says, look, I'm leaving. He had told them several times that he was going to die and they didn't quite understand that. He said, the people you look up to, the people that you grew up being told, be like them, those people are going to turn on me. And then he says, one of you guys is going to turn me in. And all of you are going to leave me on my own. And I'm going to be killed. And it's a weird vibe at that last, what we call the Last Supper. He tells them not to worry though. And things get like really dark really quickly. One of his own, Judas, if you've ever heard of him, Judas goes out, goes to the authorities, and he tells these people who were jealous of Jesus's fame and influence, he tells them where they can find Jesus alone, unprotected. And so they go and get him. and he doesn't fight back. He's taken away. If you know the story, he's put before Pilate. He's put before the Sanhedrin, the governing Jewish leaders. They say that he's going to be killed. And then he's crucified. Now, if you've heard the word crucified and you know like the cross so many of us wear around our necks, you know Jesus' crucifixion, right? But back then it wasn't Jesus' crucifixion, it was Roman criminals' crucifixion. It was like the worst possible way you could kill someone. What they would do is just beat you to a pulp. Like if you've ever seen a boxing match or if you watch UFC and you know there's like the knockout punch, and then what happens? In all their adrenaline, the person who knocks out their opponent jumps on them and gets ready to go at the person on the ground. And everybody at the same time is kind of like, ugh, and they grab him and pull him off for the sake of the other one. Crucifixion was like just letting him stay there and beating him senseless. Senseless. They say he was unrecognizable. And then what they would do, in like the ultimate power move, Rome would take that like body. It was hanging on to life by a thread, and they would hang it for everyone to see. This is what happens when you mess with Rome. And then he would slowly suffocate and die. It was brutal. It was shameful. It was humiliating. It was embarrassing. And what I can tell you is that in that moment, there were no believers. There were no Christians. No one followed Jesus. Everyone had left him. You know why? Because everything he said before that was out the window. Like, how is this guy gonna tell me not to worry about my life? Like, somebody who has power doesn't get overpowered in that way. And it's over. It's over. It was the darkest moment in their lives. All these followers of Jesus, none of them decide, all right, we're gonna carry the torch and keep teaching. They go into hiding because he claimed to be the answer, and because he was dead, they had no answer. They're like, well, this wasn't like just a cool set of teaching. It was based on him. And if that happened to him, we've got nothing to stand on. If he can't take care of himself, how is he gonna take care of us? So some go into hiding. Others of them who were fishermen go back to being fishermen. Nobody was waiting, hoping Jesus would come back, even though he had told them several times, on the third day, I'll be back. So that happens on a Friday. Saturday was the ancient Jewish Sabbath, and all Jesus' friends were Jewish, and you couldn't touch a dead body on a Saturday, so no one goes to the tomb on Saturday. But Sunday, the third day, there are these women that decide to go and wrap his body and have a more formal, unrushed time to grieve. And they go there, and the tomb where they would have put the body was open. And they don't know what to think. And then they have this experience with an angelic messenger, an angel. Here's what the angel says to them. He says, don't be afraid. For I know that you're looking for Jesus, the one who was crucified. You're looking for that body. He says he's not here. He is risen. Ready? Just as he said. Just as he said he would. And then it's interesting, the angel says, come and see the place where he lay. Go see for yourself. Remember where they put the body? Go see. These are actually words Jesus used when he was inviting people to follow him. Come and see. He says, go see for yourself. And in that moment, when they came to believe, for them, everything changed. And for those followers of Jesus, everything changed. The version of Jesus's followers Peter, James, John, Mary, anyone else who came to believe that Jesus did what he said he was going to do, the version of them that believed that was radically different than the version that didn't. They went from being afraid, like hiding, being like totally unaware, uncertain of what the future would bring, to being these bold world changers. These people who had joy that they said could not be taken from them. And do you know why? Do you know why? Like for me, for a long time, I thought like the resurrection was it was his last trick in his bag of tricks. You know, he did a lot of cool things and he finished this one with a grand finale. But it's so much more important than that. You see, when Jesus died, everything he said, that message that was maybe too good to be true, that thousands wanted to hear when he died, it went out the window. But Jesus coming back from the dead validated everything that he said. In an instant, they knew, all right, it's all real. It's all real. In fact, the resurrection, Jesus coming back, gave him the ability to explain why he went to the cross. And that further helped them understand what God is like. He explained how this was an expression of love for people, just how far he would go for people. And it validated everything he said about God being a father, about not having to worry, about not having to be concerned about the uncertainty in the future, about having trouble in the world and still being able to have peace. All of that he confirmed. Now, maybe for you that's helpful. And you're like, okay, makes sense, right? But maybe you're still struggling to see how believing this actually makes a difference in your life. Maybe, and I get that if you're struggling. Think about it like this, okay? So we take our messages, our services, we put them online. Sometimes we'll chop them up into little clips and put them out on Instagram, Reels, Shorts, whatever. They go out there. Well, one time there was this message, actually not too long ago, and in it I was explaining how God is a father, and he doesn't put us in situations to test us just for fun, but he cares about us. And I said, if you think that he's just trying to test you just for fun, just play games with you, that's not how God operates. And that was the end of the clip. Someone comments below with a profound question. And I don't know what's going on in this person's life, but the question was, how can we know how God operates? Who gets to say? What I can tell you is that if you haven't been there yet, there will be a time when you need to know how God operates. Maybe it's after a diagnosis. Maybe it's after some bad news. Maybe it's after loss. Maybe it's facing the uncertainty of the future. And when it's totally out of your control and you don't know what to do, you're gonna wanna know how God operates. Is he punishing you for the things that you're going through? Or did he tell you there would be difficulty and that he would be with you through it? Did this just happen, like just by chance? Are you out of God's hands? Did you do something that he didn't like and now he's saying, forget you? Who gets to say? Who gets to say? I remember when I was in 7th grade, I was at a sleepover, and sleepovers are where all the deep intellectual conversations happen. And we're sitting there, me and a bunch of my friends, we're talking about God. I don't know how we got there, but that's what we were talking about. And everyone's throwing their ideas around. One guy's like, you know what I think? I think God's gonna send us back. We're gonna be like dogs, and then we'll get to see what it's like to be a dog. Someone else is like, yeah, I think we're getting points, and maybe, depending on how many points we get to, things are gonna look different for us on the other side. And everyone's throwing out these ideas. And I had my idea that I had been taught in Sunday school, but mine just seemed like another one of the ideas. And maybe at a sleepover, nothing hangs in the balance and nothing's on the line. But when you need to know You want to know who has the authority to say what God is really like. And what Easter tells us is that Jesus does. If you can do what only God can do, if you have the ability to do what only God can do, then you have the authority to say what God is like. I heard one guy say, I think he put it simply, perfectly, he said, if someone can predict their death and the way that they're gonna die and their resurrection and time it just right, I'm pretty much with that guy. With whatever he says. Jesus coming back from the dead validated everything that he said. Now, I think it's worth pointing this out, and maybe you're here. For me, for a long time, for years of my life, like since my teenage years, even a little bit into college, like Easter was not super exciting for me. In other words, I would say, I didn't necessarily want Jesus to be right because I didn't believe that he was good. Like if I were to boil it down, and I never did as a teenager, but now looking back, what I would say is really Easter for me, the way I understood it was a God I didn't really believe in, offering me forgiveness I didn't really ask for because of rules I had broken that I didn't really agree to follow. And so people are like, celebrate. Like, I'm having trouble really finding the joy in that. If that's where you are, I get that. I get that. Maybe that was the version of Christianity that was presented to you, intentionally or unintentionally. But the truth is so much better than that. Jesus started with something called grace, which is the idea of God in your corner. Whether you like him or not, whether you believe in him or not, whether you've done good or not, God is in your corner and wants what's best for you. The whole story of the cross is God taking the first step. Say, I'm in your, this is how far I will go for you. And so what if for you, like the issue, the thing that has you keeping God at an arm's length is a misunderstanding of the whole package. What if it's not driven by guilt and shame, but by gratitude? What if God isn't a judge who's like ready to drop the hammer, but a father who cares about you better than you could possibly care about your children? What if the church wasn't supposed to be the self-appointed moral police of the world, but people that made an impact that lasted for the good of the human race? What if all of this is so much better? So much better. And you're keeping it at an arm's length because you've presented a version of Christianity that Jesus did not present to the world. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here, but here's where we'll wrap it up. When Jesus talked about this stuff, God as a father, grace, God in your corner, this better way to be human, he often gave invitations. And a lot of times when we think about like taking a step in that direction, we think about these grand, huge, like sign your life away, commit to this, give all this, do like huge, big commitments. But Jesus asked for steps. Like, okay, you're not sure? Just come and see. Take a step in this direction. And like I said before, some were like, okay, fine. Others like, I'm not expecting much, but they're like, fine, sure. Let's see if he really is who he said he is. For us, I'll be totally honest with you, for us, Easter Sunday is exciting. You know why? It's because people come to church who normally don't come to church. And it's exciting because for us, honestly, our hope is that there will be people that say, fine, I'll take a step. Whatever that may look like. Maybe it's coming back next week. Maybe it's watching online. Maybe it's going to another church. Maybe it's downloading a podcast. But just one step to say, all right, maybe God is better than I thought he was. Maybe the version that was presented to me is twisted. What did those people who could not get enough of what Jesus had to say, what were they hearing that I'm not hearing? And so you take a step. That's literally what we pray for around here. And so my question is, what would that look like for you? And what hangs in the balance? What if it actually could change the way you live your life? The way you handle difficulty, the way you see uncertainty, the way you deal with challenges, disappointment, loss? What if it really could make a difference? But it will require you to take a step in that direction. That's what we want, not from you, but for you. Because we honestly believe that the version of you that believes that Jesus came back from the dead is so much better off than the version that doesn't. But you have to see for yourself.